Hi, David here, and welcome back to the channel, where we are looking at the teaching of divine love through the automatic writings of the early 20th century medium James Padgett. In last Sunday's video, we looked at two messages, one from Luke and one from John the Baptist, who took the opportunity to settle some old debates as to what happened when John baptized Jesus and what it signified. Today, we're going to take a look at three messages to James from Mark, John, and James, all remembered as saints in the Christian churches. James is one of the brothers of Jesus, and he emerged as a prominent figure among Jesus' followers in Jerusalem after Jesus' execution. The first two messages are both from September 20, 1915. They're very brief, but they're still worth looking at in terms of building up a picture of how people in spirit managed to encourage James Padgett through periods when his material worries got the better of him, or when he had his doubts about the task being asked of him in receiving and publicising these messages. I'll read both of the messages through, as they're very short, and then say a few words about them. So we'll begin with Mark's message. I am here, St. Mark. Let your faith increase and your belief in the fact that we write to you grow until no doubt will possibly enter into your mind as to who the writers are. I am here merely to say these few lines and encourage you to put forth every effort to get in condition to receive the messages which shall be written to you. Your worries will not stay with you much longer, for you will soon be in condition to do these things that your father spoke of, so that you will be relieved of your worries. I will not write more, but will say good night. Your brother in Christ, St. Mark. And then John's message. I am here, John. I will not write long, but I merely wish to say that you must continue to have faith and pray. Soon you will be able to do as the Master has said, and you will succeed in getting in the condition to do his work as he desires. I come to you so often because I am so much interested in your work and in helping forward the great efforts that will be made by the Christian spiritualists to give to humankind the truths of God. So believe in what we say, and you will find that what we promise you will be realized, and that you will become free from your worries and be very happy in your old age. I will not write more, but will say good night. Your brother in Christ, John. So two messages, both saying pretty much the same things. Prayer to God, in particular prayer for divine love, is key to James strengthening his faith, so that he achieves the spiritual condition that will enable the more important messages that it is hoped will be possible to deliver through James. John's mention of Christian spiritualists is an interesting one. Christian spiritualism was much more of a feature of the spiritualist movement than it is now. And even when this message was given in 1915, many spiritualists did not regard themselves as Christians, with traditional Christian teachings very much something that people often reacted against. Equally, Christian spiritualists did not then have the knowledge of divine love, as explained in the Padgett messages, which meant their knowledge was incomplete. I think what John is anticipating here is that Christian spiritualists might prove to be those most likely to take an interest in the Padgett messages. Traditional Christians belonging to one of the mainstream churches are less likely to take an interest in information given by people in spirit through a medium, because this flies in the face of too much of what they have been taught, even though Christianity was originally a spirit religion. By the same token, spiritualists who do not see themselves as Christians, and there are plenty who happily tell me that because they are spiritualists, therefore they are not Christians, are also unlikely to pay attention to the Padgett messages, not because they have a problem with mediumship, but because they have a problem with the identity of the spirits communicating and with some of the content of the messages themselves. So I don't think John is mentioning Christian spiritualists because they have a full and complete understanding at that point in time, but simply because they are the ones most likely to take an interest in the content of the messages James Padgett is receiving. Those two messages from Mark and John were in fact two of a total of 8 messages that James received that evening from different spirit communicators, all pretty much in the same terms. So James at that point in time is clearly in need of a bit of encouragement, or a bit of TLC, tender loving care, as we might say. The reference to the Master is, of course, a reference to Jesus, although he is not one of those who wrote on this evening. The final message, as so often, is from Helen, James's wife, and he seems to have asked her if Jesus might be annoyed with him for his doubts and hesitations, and if this might be the reason he wasn't there. But she says clearly that this is not the case, and that there is never any hint of annoyance or frustration on Jesus' part, only understanding. Sometimes when James was feeling a bit prone to doubt or uncertainty, so that what we might call the higher, more spiritual messages were difficult to convey through him, one of those communicating regularly would take the opportunity to tell him more about life and spirit as a way of keeping him interested and in the habit of writing. And 5 days later, on September 25, 1915, St. James comes forward to do just that. I am here, St. James. Let me tell you a few things concerning the spirit world. That is, the world that is below the celestial heavens. Just before we get into the message properly, the messages given through James distinguish between the spiritual spheres, to one of which we all go initially, and the celestial spheres, or heavens, which are suited to those who share in divine love. So St. James is having a chat with James Padgett about the spiritual spheres. He tells us that in the several spheres, which are 7 in number, are many planes, inhabited by spirits of many nations and races of humankind. And these various races have, to a certain extent, the customs and beliefs that they had when on earth. The lines of demarcation are just as strictly drawn as are those of the several nations on earth. The result of this is that many spirits who live in this exclusive manner never learn anything other than what their own leaders tell them, and what their various sacred books may teach them. So essentially what James is telling us is that the old saying, birds of a feather flock together, holds true in spirit just as much as it does in this world upon the earth. People enjoy being part of a community, so we pay attention to the things that are said in the community we choose to belong to, which for most of us will be a continuation of the community we are already used to belonging to from our earth life. And it's not just Christians or people from any other particular background who do this, as James goes on to say. The Mohammedan is a Mohammedan still, and so likewise the followers of Zoroaster, and also those of Buddha and of Confucius, and all of the various founders of religious sects. Sometimes these spirits in their wanderings will meet spirits of other races than their own and interchange thoughts. but very rarely do they discuss matters pertaining to their respective beliefs. So James tells us that people might happily pass the time of day with each other, but only rarely are we likely to have one of those challenging conversations where we have to organize and articulate our deeper beliefs. St. James continues, "There are undoubtedly truths in the sacred writings and beliefs of all these races of spirits, and to the extent that these truths are taught and understood, these spirits are benefited. I am now speaking of spiritual truths, because as to the mere truths pertaining to the natural or material world, they all have the same opportunity to investigate and understand them." So James is reminding us that there is value in the scriptures of any tradition to the extent that they encourage us to work on our spirituality. If we want to extend that to moral teachings, there can be value in many writings and perspectives that we would not necessarily regard as religious. When it comes to the natural or physical world, we all have the same opportunities to explore. This is not something we do by relying on religious texts. As John goes on to say, there is no race or creed or doctrinal beliefs and teachings as to these truths affecting the material. And by this I mean material as it exists in both the spiritual and earthly worlds. I say that each of these races or sects has their own ideas and doctrines of the truth, and can progress no further than the limits which those ideas permit them to progress. James's mention of the material environment as it exists in both the spiritual and earthly worlds is an interesting one, reminding us that both are objectively real environments. It can be hard for us to envisage what it is like to be in spirit, in a spiritual environment or place. People often wonder if we end up as some kind of ghost or wraith that just passes through solid objects. But people in spirit constantly tell us that their environment is just as real to them, meaning just as solid and capable of being touched and sensed, as ours is to us, possibly more so. But despite the freedom to explore what we might call the material or physical extent and nature of the spirit world, we remain bound or limited by many of the doctrines, ideas, or beliefs that we have taken on board before arriving there. Although we become free of the physical form, we don't suddenly become free of the way we think. The teaching of divine love and the knowledge of the new birth that comes through sharing in it, as detailed in the Padgett messages, is an attempt to help us to break free of the limited perspective we inhabit without that knowledge. As St. James tells us, no founder of any race or sect has ever taught the new birth, and the inflowing of the divine love in contradistinction to that of the natural love. The teachings of Jesus are the only ones that reveal to man the existence of this divine love and how to obtain it. So you see the importance of this truth coming to man. So the knowledge of divine love is something that those who have it seek to share with others in spirit who have not been taught of it. Through James Padgett, it becomes something they can share with those of us upon the earth. The reason this is needed is because although it was central to what Jesus taught, the knowledge of it was lost after his death, and has not been recovered through any other tradition, even those that teach of an afterlife. James concludes his message saying the teachings of the other founders will show men the way to a life of happiness and to what they may suppose as continuous existence. But the teachings of Jesus are the only ones that declare and lead men to a realization of the true immortality of the soul. I must stop. Your brother in Christ, St. James. That mention of immortality reminds us that evidence of a continuing life beyond our embodied life upon the earth is not of itself evidence of a continuing life that lasts forever. It is just evidence of a continuation. We are not immortal just because we leave our earthly bodies behind and find we last a bit longer than we expected to. The only souls in spirit who know themselves to be immortal are those who share in God's love, divine love, his substance, because those souls will last as long as God does. Souls who do not share in divine love do not know how long they will continue for. They only know that they continue for the time being. We began today by looking at a couple of messages aimed at helping James Padgett get past his doubts, although he is still questioning if the following response is anything to go by. Although he's already tried to wrap up his message, there is a further reply from St. James saying, "Yes, I am that James." James Padgett then asks about the title saint and whether it signifies anything. St. James replies, no. Saint is only used as a means of identification. It has no significance in our spirit world. This is something everyone in spirit says, whether it's about religious titles, royal or aristocratic titles, academic titles, whatever. None of these make the slightest difference in spirit in terms of where we end up. Where we go when we pass from this world depends entirely upon the kind of person we are. It's often said that when we pass to spirit, the first person we truly meet is ourselves. The next video in this sequence, video 10.14, which will be uploaded next Sunday, will look at another message from the Apostle John, in which he emphasizes the importance of prayer in achieving soul development, and reminds us that this was not always easily grasped by the apostles when Jesus called them to follow him. The next midweek video, 2.14, will look at a message to James Padgett from a gentleman by the name of John Carlyle, who was a prominent US politician into the 1890s and who passed to spirit in 1910, just 5 years before the date of the message. So do join me for one or both of those videos. In the meantime, I do hope you've enjoyed this video and found it interesting. I can never quite get enough of this material. I find it endlessly fascinating. If you have a moment, please click on the like button for this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It all helps to spread knowledge of this material, so you never know what good you might be doing or who you might be helping by doing that. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon. Take care until then. Bye-bye.